If you watch the Crystal Radio video in this series, then you'd realize there's a lot more stuff going on in this radio. This was when I had a very pivotal memory, and that was I was probing around my tube type radio, very similar to this, and I hit the plate voltage straight across my body. The plate voltage was 200 volts, and I was sitting in a chair and I fell down on the floor. So that was quite, and my most concern was, did my parents see that? Especially did my mom see that, or she wouldn't let me play with the radio anymore. So this was a kit radio that I put together. This is not the same one. This is a little more crude than the one that I had, but I never took pictures of the other radios that I have. So let's just look at some of the pieces. Here's this flat wire. Well, that's the antenna. That's the AM antenna wire that you can string around outside. And this is the tuning coil. This is the variable capacitor that figures out, you have these little fins that go in and out on that variable capacitor, and that's what changes things enough. You get a different RF signal, so you're tuning in which radio you're listening to. One of these tubes is the grid. Remember, on that crystal radio, all we had was a crystal, germanium crystal with a cat whisker. This one is a powered tube that allows you to control the frequencies coming in to a lower frequency and detect the audio that you need to listen to. And then what else do we have? Well, this is the buildup of that 200 volts that knocked me across the body and caused me to hit the floor. And this is the transformer, and this is a capacitor to smooth out the voltages so that you don't have a going on in your radio. And you notice some various other little components, a little coil down here, capacitors, some resistors. It's not very much to it. And one of these is an additional stage, which if my brain was still in gear with all this stuff, I would say the other one is an additional amplification stage. That's just my recollection from what I can remember now. And it wouldn't be unusual to have a setup like this with 3 tubes of the radios. Now these things are not cool like a transistor. These get hot to the touch. And what else can I say that's very interesting about this? What's this coming in? Well, this must be the power cord. This must be here's the power cord coming into the transformer that actually increases the voltage rather than reducing the voltage. This was great. Now let's just to get some ideas about vacuum tubes, because you don't see them anymore. That's why it was hard to find a picture of something like this. Let's look at diagram of a vacuum tube. This is the plate voltage that had the 200 volts that knocked me to the floor. And this is what is a positive. It has to be a positive potential, because through the vacuum, the electrons flow. Now, where do the electrons come from? They come from a heated cathode. That's a specific kind of material that when you heat it up to about 1,000 degrees, it starts emitting electrons, and they are naturally attracted to the plate. So if we didn't have these other grids in there, it would just go straight through. Now notice you couldn't have current going the other way. So essentially this is just a big diode if I don't have the control grids in there. Now there's a 6.3 volt heater that's below the cathode that isn't really shown here. But there would be a little when you look at the vacuum tubes, you see a little glow. That's from the heating element below the cathode. And that's what causes that. Now, where does the heat come from? Well, it comes from that little thing right there, because if you don't heat it up to 1,000 degrees, now the outside of the tube isn't 1,000 degrees, but it's 1,000 degrees right at that little coil there. So it's just like a heating element. Nothing unusual about that. Let's look at the control grid. If you have a triode, a plate, cathode, and control grid, then this becomes an amplifier. And here's why it acts that way. A transistor has 3 leads, and that is what? I guess, is that a cathode and an anode? Is that what those are called? And then they have a base. Well, let's get out of, it's hard to go from vacuum tubes to solid state. But anyway, as this thing becomes more negative, it will repel the electrons away to the point that it'll actually stop them. Now, the control grid is real close to the cathode, so these are just very tiny distances, just a few millimeters. Even the plate is pretty close, but that's how you control the amplification. And that might be enough to give you an idea about what the vacuum tube is like and how it differs from the transistor, even though it's performing the same kind of action. That's enough for this memory.